Welcome. In this lesson, I will talk about the transmission control protocol ports or TCP ports in short that Galera cluster uses for the inter-cluster communication among all the cluster nodes. Okay. So remember we mentioned about the SSTs and ISTs back. On these ports, one node will transfer the data to all the other nodes. Okay, the very first one is 3306. By now you should be very much familiar with this port. This port is where MySQL runs on, so we need to open this port 3306, and the first one after that is 4444, and that is the state snapshot transfer protocol. Okay, so this is the SST protocol. In order for the state snapshot to be transferred from one cluster node to the other, we need to have this port open here, here, and here. Similarly 4567, this is actually the replication traffic between the cluster nodes. This is the replication that is happening between all these cluster nodes, and that port also need to be open on across all the nodes of a cluster. 4568, that is the incremental state transfer snapshots. So like exactly SST, ISTs, it is required to have a 4568 port open on all the nodes. So these 1, 2, 3, 4, whenever you want to set up a Galera cluster based on either MariaDB, PerconnexterDB, or the generic codership Galera cluster for MySQL, you need to have these 4 ports open. Okay, now let's go ahead and talk about a little bit first the SE Linux. Although we can create a policy for the Galera cluster in the SE Linux, but for the demonstration purposes, without involving the extra steps for the installation of Galera and the setup, we will disable the SE Linux. But remember, we can always enable it later on by creating a specific policy. Okay, now if you have your own VM virtual machines running either on VMware or VirtualBox or in a data center, you can open these ports accordingly. Either you have a firewall-cmd on the Linux box, or you have other firewall that you want to configure these TCP ports to open up. Since we will be installing Galera cluster on Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and we will be using AWS as our cloud provider, we will actually create a security group, and we will add these as an inbound rules for these ports. As you know by now that the security group is the actually firewall for the EC2 VMs in the AWS cloud. All right, now we know what network ports will be involved in the Galera cluster. Let's move on towards setting up, and for that I will see you in the next lesson.